We continue today with the 5th chapter of the book of Devarim. Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael. We know that Moshe has been talking to Israel the whole time, but here we're told that Moshe once again calls all of Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Eleihem, and he says to them, Shema Yisrael. Not the most famous Shema Yisrael, we will have that. But listen, Israel, et hachukim ve'et hamashpatim asher anochi dover ba'oznechem hayom, to the commandments that I will teach to you on this day. V'limadatem otam u'shmartem la'asotam. Hear them and observe them, learn them. Right, and here we see a little bit, right? We know about Na'aseh v'nishma, Bnei Yisrael say it the first. We will do and we will listen. We trust you. But Moshe here is already, and this will come up more later in the book of Devarim, learn them, understand them, and then perform them. Verse 2, Adonai Eloheinu karati manu brit b'chorev. Hashem, our God, made a covenant, concluded a covenant with us in Chorev. Lo et avotenu. This was not with our fathers. Karat Adonai tabrit hazot ki tanu anachnu elafo hayom kulanu chayim. Right? This is a major principle in Jewish life, that the covenant was not just something of the past. It's something that remains. It's something that is live. It's something that all of us are bound in and all of us have to participate in. Panim bifanim diber Adonai machem bahar mitochesh. Face to face, God spoke to you from the fire, to you, even though you might say it was the past generation. Moshe is saying, God spoke to you from the fire. Don't think it was the past generation. And Moshe said this yesterday over and over again. Don't forget Har Sinai. That's something that you can't forget. That's something that you need to remember, and you need to teach it and tell it to your descendants. Anochi omed ben Adonai uvenechem ba'etahi la'gid lachem et dvar Adonai ki reitem mipnei ha'esh v'lo alitem bahar le'mor. I stood between you and God to tell you what God said, because you were scared of the fire and you refused to go up. You refused to get close to God. Obviously, here it makes it sound like they refused to go up onto the mountain. They refused to go almost to the foot of the mountain. Obviously, we know that going back into Devarim, into Shmot, that the mountain was gated off, that the mountain was closed, that nobody could go up to it when God's revelation happened, because if they would have gone up, then they would have immediately died. So that's not what Moshe is referring to here when he says that you have you didn't go up to the mountain. And now Moshe, we have, I don't know if you want to stand, but we have the repeating of the Aseret Hadibrot. We of course had the Aseret Hadibrot for the first time in Parshat Yitro, and now we are going to have them for a second time. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. Just like the first one, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. You shall have no other gods besides me. Lo ta'aseh lecha fesel kol tmuna asher b'shamayim mimal ve'asher ba'aretz mitachat ve'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz. You shall not make for yourself a sculpted image, any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or the earth below, or in the waters below, or the earth. And we had that also yesterday at length, where we specified all sorts of creepy crawlies, different animals. But here Moshe is right. He's pressed to them and told them yesterday, you need to remember the Aseret Hadibrot. You need to remember how God revealed himself to you. And therefore he's repeating it, these 10 utterances. Lo tishtachaveh lahem v'lo ta'avdein. Do not bow down to them, do not serve them. Why? Because I am a passionate God. And I visit the guilt of the parents upon the children to the 3rd or even the 4th generation. And if you think that's unfair, that God punishes up to the 4th generation, just know that God shows kindness up to the 1,000th generation to those who keep my commandments. Now we get to the 4th of the Aseret Hadvarim, verse 11. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Lo tisat shem Adonai Elohecha lashav, ki lo yinakeh Adonai et asher yisat shmo lashav. Do not swear falsely by God's name, right? God will not clear the one who swears falsely. If you swear falsely, then God will have to do something about it. So here we have the 4 commandments that in many ways or I shouldn't say commandments because there are more than 4 commandments, but 4 utterances that are clearly bein Adam limakom, between God and humans. There's a debate amongst the commentaries whether or not the opening verse there, Anochi Hashem Lokecha, is that a mitzvah or not, to know that there is a God? Is there such a mitzvah to inquire? But certainly the idea of not having other gods, not making statues, not bowing down to them or worshiping them in any other way are certainly all commandments, and certainly not swearing falsely by God's name is one as well. Now we continue in Pasuk Yud Bet with the 5th of the commandment, and the one that's obviously going to seem the most different in many ways. Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho kasher tzivcha Adonai Elohecha. Observe the Shabbat day and keep it holy as your God Hashem has commanded you. When we had this back in the 19th chapter of Shmot, it said Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. To remember, here it says observe. The rabbis understand, they say Zachar v'Shamor b'Dibor echad namru, that God said Zachor and Shamor at the exact same time, what a human being couldn't say, and the two of them therefore are intertwined, and that has a very important halachic significance, which is Shabbat is a mitzvah naseisha zman grama. Shabbat is a mitzvah that is a time-bound commandment, and we know that generally the general rule is that women are not obligated in time-bound positive commandments, such as sitting in a sukkah, such as blowing the shofar. That doesn't mean that they can't participate in them and that there's not schar, but they are not obligated. There are exceptions, and one of the exceptions is Shabbat. And why? Because the same way they're obligated to not do melacha, to not perform creative labor on Shabbat, so too intertwined with that, because they were said together, that women are fully obligated in the things like Zechirat Shabbat, which is saying Kiddush, and other ways. So, if your wife, Mordechai, wants to make Kiddush for you this Friday night, she certainly is allowed. She has the same obligation. In fact, there are those who might say that if you go to shul on Friday night and she does it, maybe, although this is not a majority opinion, maybe her requirement is greater than yours. So this is the change from Zachor v'Shamor. And the mitzvah continues, the 5th of the Aseret Hadibrot here in verse 13. 6 days you shall do all of your work. Vayom hashvi'i, and on the 7th day, Shabbat la'Adonai Elohecha. It is a Sabbath to Hashem your God. Lo ta'aseh chol melacha, do not do any work. Ata uvincha v'itecha v'avdecha v'amatecha v'shorcha v'chamorecha v'chol be'emtecha v'gercha asher b'shorecha l'man yanuach avdecha v'amatcha chamocha. You can't do any work, neither you, your son, your daughter, your slaves, your donkeys, your cattle, the strangers, your male or female slaves. Everybody needs to rest. And this is part of the significance, the true significance of Shabbat. It's not just a day of rest for the master, for the Jew who's in charge. It's a day of rest for everybody. For the slave, everybody deserves the dignity of Shabbat. Everybody deserves to rest. Everybody deserves a day off, that they should be kamocha. V'zacharta. And why would you do this? Why would you give your slaves a day off? Well, ki eved ayita be'eretz Mitzrayim. Just remember that you were a slave in Egypt. And God, with his incredible strength and with those miracles, took you out. And that's why God is commanding you to observe the Shabbat. And I would say to observe the Shabbat in that way, to make it a day that is a day of fairness, a day of equity, a day of rest, not only to those in charge, but a day of rest also to those who are enslaved. Kabed et avicha v'et imecha. And here we have the 5th. I'm sorry, that was the 4th. Here we have the 5th of the commandments, to honor your mother and father, kasher tzivcha Adonai Elohecha, as Hashem your God has commanded you. And here's one of the few commandments where we have a reward given to you, that if you honor your mother and father, then you will live a long life on the land that God has given to you. There are, of course, different commandments related to parents. There is kibud avaim. There is also a command of yira, of fear, of reverence, and the rabbis understand that in different ways as to how what are the applications? How do you fulfill kabed? How do you feel yira? How do you show your reverence? How do you show your respect and honor? How do you show your fear, etc., etc.? Now we get to the shorter commandments. Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. Velo talaf, you shall not commit adultery. Velo tignov, you shall not kidnap, is the way Oftentimes, Geneva is stealing, but in the 10 utterances, it's understood as being kidnapping. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Likewise, none of you shall crave your neighbor's house. Nothing that your neighbor has. And obviously, in that last commandment, which is different, all the rest of them are action. Right? The last one is saying, even according to the majority opinion who understand, even coveting, even wanting these things, desiring things is problematic. It's hard not to desire what others have when you see others flaunting what they have, and maybe you do not have that. And the Torah here is trying to help you that this is maybe something to aspire to. It's not an easy thing. If you're driving around in a 30-year-old jalopy and a guy who drives by in his, Porsche, and you wanted a Porsche when you were a kid, it's hard not to want a Porsche that second and not to be jealous. But the Torah is saying, right, it's hard, but I'm going to try to tell you to not do it. There are others who say you only really violate this commandment when you actually do something about it. So there's an opinion that says that. So it's not just the coveting, but it's the coveting, and when you actually do something, steal his object or whatever it might be. Verse 19, continuing now after the Aseret Hadibrot, Moshe now recounts what happens around it. Et hadvarim ha'ela dibir Adonai al kol kalchem b'har mitoch ha'esh ha'anan v'arafel kol gadol v'lo yasa. God spoke these words to the entire congregation at the mount with a mighty voice out of the fire and dense clouds. And then God gave them to the two tablets, on two tablets of stone, and he gave them to me. So this is right. The first Aseret Hadibrot is all about God. God is speaking these words. God is saying these things in these miraculous, amazing ways. And then God writes on the two tablets and gives them to Moshe. When you first started to hear the darkness, all of the elders, all of the leaders, you came to me. We have been shown God's majestic presence. We've heard God's incredible voice out of the fire. We've seen this. We've seen that God can speak to a human and the human can live. So let us not die. We're scared. This fire, this dynamism is going to eat us up. So please, don't let this fire consume us. If we continue to hear God's voice, it was too much for them. They couldn't bear it. Because is there anybody else who could hear the voice of God from a fire like this and live? And we'll see later ideas like this later on in the Tach. Think of the story of Shimshon, where his Shimshon's mother, the angel comes to Shimshon's mother and Shimshon's father. When he hears about it, he thinks they're going to die because God has spoken to them. And this is obviously a much more incredible experience. This is a full body experience that happens to Bnei Israel at Har Sinai, and so they're terrified. And thus they continue in verse 24. So go and hear close what God will tell you. And then you can tell us everything that God tells you, and we will willingly do it. The rabbis point out here that the word is va'at. It should be va'ata. It should be in the male, and it's in the female. This idea that maybe women are kinder, and therefore they say to Moshe, God is a thunder, God is lightning, God is too much for us. So va'at, tell it us in a soft fashion. I don't know if that's true. There are men who are nice. There are women who are nice. There are men who are kind. There are women who are kind. There are men who are mean. There are women who are mean. But that's what the rabbis say back on that seeming punctuation mistake of it should be ve'ata, but it's va'at. Continuing in verse 25, and God listened to what you guys asked me. And God said to me, I heard what you said and what they said, and it's fine. May they always be such a mind, right? They're scared, they're terrified. Hopefully that's going to inspire them to do the commandment. So let them always be like that. So if they can't handle it, that's fine. But let's hope that the experience shows them that they should have respect for God, they should revere God, they should understand how lucky they are, and they should perform the commandments. And thus, And more lahem shuvu lachem lo aleichem. Therefore, go tell them to go back to their tents, to go home. Vatapo amodi madiva dabra elecha kol mitzvah. But you, Moshe, you stay with me, and I will tell you all. I will teach you all the commandments. Vachukim vamishmatim asher tilamdein. All the different types of laws that you will teach them. Vasu va'aretz asher anochi notein lahem l'rishtam. They should do them in the land in which I will give them. Ushmartem lasol kasher tziva Adonai Elohechem etchem lo tasuru yamin usmal. And don't deviate for them. Don't go to the right, to the left. Be a straight arrow. Listen to the commandments. Everything that God told you to do, you shall go on that path, right? The word halacha, it's a path. It's not something that's static. It's something that continues, and you should continue in that path. Leman tichyun, so that you will remain alive, v'tov lachem, and that it will be good to you. Barachtem yamin ba'aretz asher tirashun, and that you will live for a long time. You shall endure in the land that God gives to you. And so Moshe tells them around, right? The Aseret Hadibrot happened, and he recounts them, his story, what happened, how it happened, and how they revered it, and how they were scared, and how that should continue to inform them in the future in terms of their relationship with God, and how therefore they should always continue to respect God and to revere God, and thus to perform the commandments, because it is in their best interest.